Snakes Turn Left, a spiritual road trip. Chapter 1, Turn Left. So I turn left at the end of my tiny suburban street. This little white car has taken that turn at least 1,000 times in the last 2 years. This time it felt new, different. I'm leaving. A full tank, $2,000 in the bank, phone completely charged, and a very half-baked plan of where I'm heading. I've been working on this plan for about 2 weeks now, and all I really know is I'm travelling north, up the east coast of Australia. About 3/4 of the way up the coast is where I reckon I might find myself. I'll figure it out when I get there, I guess. Right now, in 2022, at the age of 22, I find myself in the very familiar streets of my suburb. I'm switching off the radio and driving towards 2 teenage boys on BMX bikes. They ride across the road in that slow, snaky way that lets you know that they're not travelling anywhere at all. Not to the park, not to the shops, they're just hanging out in their street. Their body language lets anyone passing through know that this is definitely their street. They probably aren't aware that they're doing it, but they stare at me with a smoothness that intensifies as I get closer. I pass them and check my mirror. One boy continues to look while the other one does a small trick. So as I turn left at the end of their street, I'm reminded that I no longer have a street of my own. I won't be returning to this suburb. If I do return, I'll definitely be someone that is just passing through. I don't know exactly where I'm going, but I definitely have an idea of why I'm going. I've recently learnt that truth-inspired statements said between drunken housemates can be far more damaging than failing to pay rent. When both of my housemates said I didn't have the guts to leave and chase my dreams, I knew I had to leave. Even if I just moved one suburb away, I knew I couldn't stay with people that thought so low of me. Anyways, I'd probably say hi if I saw them again. If I saw them circling their bikes around each other, I'd probably give them a quick toot and a wave. It scares me that I don't actually know if I'll catch my dreams or not. But what is scarier, and maybe even terrifying, is that my 2 closest friends will never ever know. When they finally got the idea that I was leaving the house, they told me I wasn't chasing anything. I was just running, they said. Running away from something. From myself, running away from them. Well, fuck them. I'm right here in my car, and soon I'll be somewhere else in my car. And then after that, I'll be somewhere else. Without them and their shit advice. I guess I should tell you that even though the drunken arguments were raging hot and deeply personal, they weren't enough to stop me sleeping with her. I slept with her drunk and I slept with her sober. Parts of me miss her already, but she can get fucked by the other housemate for all I care. I'm sure they've already done the deed. She was the second best sex I've ever had. The best was the only other person I've had sex with. My first. So anyways, as I drive down this new main road, I find myself smiling. I uselessly snake the car left and right, back and forward across the 2 lanes. This is my street, and this is my car. The next street I turn into will be mine, and the next, and the next. I find myself approaching the biggest challenge of my journey so far, the turn off to my parents' place. I've probably taken that turn at least 222,000 times in my life. Dad loves to tell us that at 6 in the morning he manoeuvred the car around these very corners like a demon, all the way to the hospital. It took him less than 5 minutes to get Mum there with all her pregnant screaming and hollering. At 5 they released her and we took 60 minutes to take the same journey home. I was the first son. With his second son, he took 30 minutes to get to the hospital and 30 minutes back. Or so the story goes. I'd never lived anywhere else until a few years ago. I moved out and rented with some dickhead mates. Well, that's what my dad calls them anyway. Looks like he was right again. The corner is getting closer. If my hands just moved slightly to the right and I committed, I'd be just taking a drive over to Mum and Dad's place. A coffee would become, you should just stay the night. Dinner would become breakfast, and before I knew it, I'd be telling my grandnephews about the big sleepover I once had at my parents' place. I find myself sitting at Mum and Dad's table. My car just drove me here. Mum just placed the coffee down. "You sure you don't want to finish your degree?" she says. "Yeah, not really." She places the honey jar on the table. You know you're welcome to stay here for as long as you want. Yeah, I know, Mum, thanks. After a long pause and a few sips of coffee, she continues her slow-release questions. So where are you going to go? I take a sip. I stare at the tablecloth. Not sure, Mum. Her face winces in pain, but she always manages to basically say the right thing. Well, if that's what you want, then you know that me and your father are always behind you. The degree Mum is speaking of is a creative writing degree. Dad reckons it's useless, Mum reckons it's what I want. The stuff they talk about in the course is pretty interesting, but some of it is just shit. In the final lecture that I attended, they spoke about not having shallow characters in your stories. Dad, he's a beekeeper that knows everything. That's it. End of story. I stand at the door of the A room, which is really the B room, and I say to him, I'm off, Dad. See you later, dickhead, he says. Oh, and he's very funny as well. Honey makes you funny. Well, that's what he always said to me and my brother. We are yet to find out if it's actually true. Anyways, he's a know-it-all with an old and cutting sense of humour. I guess in this case he sort of does know it all, because I was here yesterday saying goodbye. He knows where my mind is up to, he knows what I'm scared of, and he reckons he knows what's going to happen. Like a predictable worker bee, he thinks he knows what I'll do and where I'll go. But fuck him, the old queen that he is. I don't need him to get lost. I can do it all by myself. He throws me a full 1 litre glass bottle of honey from across the room. Its precious and laboured contents hangs in the air, surrounded by a glass cocoon. It slips through my hands and I catch it between my wrists and my chest. He gave me one for the road yesterday too. Fuck, he's an arsehole. Chapter 2. Stakes and Ladders. I find myself driving up the main highway. No shirt, the radio loud, my mind ticking over. I won't spend all of our time talking about my recent study, I promise. I've moved on from creative writing, but I'll mention it this one last time. They reckon so many stories fail because the main character has nothing or not enough at stake. A shitty job, coffee with mum, dickhead mates, a degree, a future job waiting tables, a future in apiculture or beekeeping. Really? It seems like there's nothing at stake. Well, that's what my lecturers would say. Well, fuck my lecturers. I can fuck it up all by myself.